He was 12, half frozen and covered in bruises, when he pushed open the glass door of a tiny auto shop on the edge of Denver. Outside, winter screamed. Inside, tools clinked, a heater hummed, a cartoon whispered on a small TV. He didn't ask for help. He didn't beg for money. "Sir, can I work here?" The chime above the door was still ringing when everything went quiet. Emily froze. Her 6-year-old stopped laughing. The German shepherd, Max, lifted his head, staring. The boy's coat was 2 sizes too big, his sneakers taped together, a purple-yellow bruise blooming on his cheek. "Wrong place, kid," Jack said. But the boy didn't leave, didn't even flinch. "My name's Ethan. I can sweep, clean. I just need a job." No one in that shop knew it yet, but that simple question was about to rewrite the meaning of family. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Snowstorm. Snow pressed low over Denver, turning late afternoon into a gray tunnel of wind and ice outside the small, struggling auto shop on the corner of a nearly empty block. Inside, the world was warmer, but heavy in a different way. The hum of a tired space heater fought with the winter that seeped through the walls, and fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above rows of overfilled shelves. The place smelled of motor oil, rubber, and old coffee, an odd mix of comfort and exhaustion. Jack Thompson stood behind the counter, pretending to sort receipts he had already counted twice. He was about 40, tall and broad-shouldered, with the solid build of a man who had once carried too much weight. Gear, responsibility, lives. Through deserts far from this cold city. His face was all hard angles and old battles, a square jaw dusted with rough stubble, a nose that had been broken and badly set, and deep brown eyes that had seen things he still woke up sweating from. A pale scar cut through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from an explosion he tried not to remember. His left knee ached in the cold. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, the movement small but stiff. Every time the wind hit the front windows, his body tensed before his mind could remind him there were no mortars here, just weather and overdue bills. On the counter in front of him lay a stack of invoices with red stamps. Past due. The shop was supposed to be his fresh start, his proof that he could build something, instead of watching things fall apart. Lately, it felt more like a slow collapse he was trying to hold up with his bare hands. Near the front, Emily Thompson knelt to zip up a bright green puffer jacket on their son. Emily was in her mid-30s, slim and of medium height, with a quiet strength that came from years of working as a nurse. Her face was soft, but not fragile, oval, with warm brown eyes that saw straight through excuses and into the truth beneath. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, a few strands slipping loose to frame her pale winter skin. There was a natural kindness in her, but also a steel edge honed by nights in emergency rooms, watching families break or hold together in a single heartbeat. She glanced once at the invoices when she thought Jack wasn't looking. The small crease between her brows deepened, then smoothed away. Emily had learned to carry worry quietly. If Jack was crumbling under the weight of failure, the last thing she wanted was to add her fear on top of it. Still, she could feel it, like a storm behind his eyes whenever he stared too long at the numbers. Lucas, 6 years old and vibrating with energy, twisted in place as his mother tried to zip his coat. He was small and wiry, with a round face, pink cheeks from the indoor heat, and bright gray eyes full of curiosity. A scattering of light freckles danced across the bridge of his nose. His blonde hair poked out from under a navy knit, beanie tipped with a little pom-pom. In one gloved hand, he clutched a red toy car, periodically driving it along the counter, making quiet vroom sounds under his breath. To Lucas, the shop wasn't a place of debt and worry. It was a kingdom. His dad knew the name of every tool. His mom could fix almost anything that hurt. And then there was Max. Max lay on an old blanket by the space heater, his big body curled, but never fully relaxed. The German shepherd was 5 years old, muscular and strong, with a classic black and tan coat and ears that stood upright like twin antennas catching every sound. His amber eyes were sharp and intelligent, carrying a seriousness that looked almost human. Max had been trained as a service and protection dog for veterans, and though his days now were spent in this cramped shop, the old instincts never left. Every time the bell above the door chimed, his head snapped up. Every stranger was scanned, evaluated, sorted into safe or dangerous. He had decided long ago that Emily and Lucas were pack, and Jack was something more, someone to protect with his last breath. Right now, Max's ears pricked as the wind outside shifted. a low growl humming in his chest before fading. He stared at the glass door as if he could sense something building out there, something more than just cold. Jack glanced at the clock. Too few customers today, like most days. The bank had called that morning, polite, professional, and ice cold. "We just want to make sure you understand the timeline, Mr. Thompson." As if he didn't count each deadline like a ticking bomb. He forced his shoulders to relax. Emily didn't need to see how close the walls felt. Lucas didn't need to know at all. The bell above the glass door chimed with a thin, brittle ring. A burst of icy air stabbed into the warmth as the door swung open. Max was on his feet in an instant, nails clicking on the concrete. His body went still, focused. Jack's spine straightened, muscles tightening the way they always did when something unexpected happened. He hated that about himself, the way his mind, trained for war, still whispered worst-case scenarios into every quiet moment. A boy stood in the doorway. He looked about 12, maybe a little younger, narrow-shouldered and painfully thin. A faded dark blue winter coat swallowed his small frame, at least 2 sizes too big. The fabric was shiny in worn spots, the cuffs frayed where the lining had burst. His jeans were stiff and damp, clinging to skinny legs, and his sneakers, once white, were torn at the sides, held together with strips of gray duct tape now stained with slush and salt. Water dripped slowly from the hem of his coat onto the shop floor, forming small, defeated puddles. His skin was too pale, the unhealthy kind, and across his left cheekbone bloomed an ugly bruise, the center dark and angry, the edges fading into sickly yellow and purple. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched as if he was trying to make himself smaller. His chin dipped in a gesture of politeness, but not low enough to completely hide the evidence of someone else's fist. His eyes, though, were what stopped Jack. They were hazel, muted and guarded, watching everything and nothing all at once. Those were not the eyes of a carefree 12-year-old. They were the eyes of someone who had learned to measure people quickly, to decide which version of himself might keep him safest. For a second, no one spoke. The heater hummed. A car hissed past outside on the wet road. Lucas's red toy car stopped halfway across the counter. When the boy spoke, his voice was quiet but precise, each word chosen like it might cost him. "Sir, ma'am, can I work here? After school, I can sweep, clean, put things away, anything." He didn't ask for money first. He didn't ask for food. He asked for work. Emily's heart jerked. She had seen children come into the ER with bruises and flimsy stories about falling off a bike or bumping into a door. This boy's bruise looked exactly like those. Her fingers twitched with the impulse to reach for a first aid kit, a mug of hot cocoa, a social worker's phone number. But she stayed where she was, one hand resting gently on Lucas's shoulder, afraid that stepping too fast might spook the boy back into the storm. Lucas stared, his bright eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't know what it meant to need a job at 12, but even at 6, he understood the shape of that bruise. He had never seen his dad look quite like this before, so still, so serious. The toy car in his hand felt suddenly out of place, too bright and plastic in a moment that felt heavy and real. Max moved first. He padded up to the boy, circling him slowly, breathing in the story carried on his wet clothes. Cold, fear, anger that wasn't his, and something beneath all of it. Stubborn, quiet determination. The boy did not reach out to pet him. He did not flinch. He just stood there, as if waiting to see if the dog would accept him or reject him, like so many invisible doors had. Max stopped at the boy's side, pressed his head lightly against the kid's hip, and sat. His tail thumped once. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Max did not give his trust easily. "What's your name, kid?" Jack asked, his voice rough but softer than before. The boy swallowed, his throat working. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Ethan Miller." The name was simple, but the way he said it, no mention of parents, no "my mom" or "my dad," told Jack more than any long story could. Something inside Jack pulled taut, like an invisible cable running from his chest to this bruised, shivering boy. For a brief second, the shop, the debt, the war, all of it faded. There was only Ethan in the doorway, the storm at his back, and the knowledge settling in Jack's bones that whatever this kid was running from, it had just crossed his threshold too. And whether he liked it or not, Jack Thompson was already in the fight. Chapter 2. After School Work. The shop felt different with Ethan standing there, water dripping from his coat onto the concrete, Max pressed to his side like a silent guard. Jack's mind ran through a dozen reasons to say no. insurance, liability, money they barely had. The simple fact that this boy didn't look like he belonged anywhere near heavy tools and jacks and engines hanging from chains. But then Ethan's words replayed in his head. I just need a job. And something inside him shifted. He remembered young faces in desert dust, kids barely older than this, eyes already carrying more weight than their shoulders should. He had walked past those eyes once, told himself they weren't his problem. He still woke up some nights wondering what happened to them. He wasn't going to make that mistake twice. All right, Jack said finally, the decision landing heavy and strangely right in his chest. Here's the deal. You come after school, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 hours each day, $8 an hour. Emily's head snapped up slightly at the number, but she didn't interrupt. Jack continued, his voice steady. You sweep the floors, wipe the counters, put tools and parts back where they belong. You don't touch anything that could hurt you unless I show you how. And you follow 3 rules, always. Ethan's shoulders straightened, eyes locked on Jack like he was listening to a commanding officer. First, Jack held up a finger. You don't lie to me. About anything. If you mess up, you say so. Second, you don't take anything that isn't yours. Not a screw, not a dollar, not a candy off the counter. Third, you show up when you say you will. On time. No disappearing without talking to me. Got it? Ethan nodded once, then again, more firmly, as if carving the rules into himself. Yes, sir, he said quietly. His voice trembled just a hair on the sir, like he was not used to using that word for someone who wasn't a threat. Good, Jack replied. You start tomorrow. School out at 3? Ethan nodded. Be here by 3:30. We'll see what you can do. For a moment, something flickered across the boy's face, something small and fragile, and so rare that Jack almost missed it. It was hope, thin and guarded, like a stray dog stepping just one paw over a threshold. Then Ethan dropped his gaze, mumbled a thank you, and backed toward the door. Max trailed him until the leash hook on the wall snagged his collar gently, stopping him. The boy glanced once at Emily and Lucas. Emily offered a small, warm smile. Lucas lifted his hand in an awkward wave. The red toy car clutched in his fist. Ethan hesitated, then gave a tiny nod in return and slipped back out into the snow. The bell chimed. The cold rushed in, then the door closed, and the world shrank again to the little shop, and the 3 Thompsons who were no longer just 3. That night, after Lucas fell asleep in a tangle of blankets and toy cars, Jack lay awake staring at the ceiling while the wind rattled the old windows. Emily turned toward him, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes darker in the dim light. You hired him, she said softly. It wasn't accusation. It was observation. Yeah, Jack answered. We don't even know anything about him, she murmured. We know enough, Jack said. We know he's cold. We know he's hungry. And we know somebody's been putting their hands on his face. The bruise on Ethan's cheek hovered in both their minds. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then exhaled. I'm not saying you're wrong, she said. This is more than sweeping floors. You know that, right? Jack looked at the cracked paint on the ceiling. I know, he said, but he asked for work, not a handout. That counts for something. Silence settled between them, not comfortable, but shared. The next afternoon, the wind had calmed, leaving a flat, cold light over the city. At 3:30 sharp, the bell above the shop door chimed. Ethan stepped inside, no longer dripping, but still in the same too-big coat, the same taped sneakers. His bruise had darkened overnight. His eyes darted once around the room, then settled on Jack with a seriousness that would have looked too heavy on a grown man, let alone a boy of 12. You're on time, Jack said, trying not to sound as relieved as he felt. Good start. He handed Ethan an old broom with a taped handle. We'll begin with the basics. Sweep everything, corners too, under the shelves. Don't just push the dirt around where I can't see it. Ethan took the broom like it was something valuable, then set to work. He didn't talk. He didn't drag his feet. He moved methodically down the aisles, getting into corners that hadn't seen daylight in months. Dust and grit collected in neat piles that he then shoveled into the bin without being asked. Emily watched from behind the counter, genuinely surprised. She had expected a kid's attention span, short bursts of effort, distractions, maybe some sulking. Instead, Ethan worked steadily, as if each stroke of the broom was a task given and completed in some invisible ledger only he could see. Max shadowed him, sometimes walking ahead, sometimes trailing just behind, as if he had appointed himself supervisor. Every so often, Ethan's fingers brushed his fur in a subconscious reassurance, like a person checking that a door was still locked. When the floor was as clean as it was likely to get, Jack brought out a plastic bin filled with scattered bolts, nuts, and washers from a dozen rushed jobs. "All right," he said. "Next test. Sort these by type and size. Bolts with bolts, washers with washers, smallest to biggest. Think you can handle that?" Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in annoyance, but in concentration. "Yes, sir." He sat on the floor cross-legged, dumped the contents of the bin out in front of him, and started to work. Bit by bit, the chaos turned into order. Bolts aligned in rows, shortest to longest, washers stacked like tiny silver coins. Odd pieces that didn't match anything were put in a separate cluster. His hands moved with careful precision, more like someone assembling a puzzle than doing a chore. Emily came around the counter at one point, pretending to wipe a nearby shelf. "He's organizing that better than you do your tool drawer," she said under her breath to Jack. He snorted softly, but there was pride in his eyes he didn't bother to hide. Lucas, off of school early that day, sat a few feet away, legs swinging, watching Ethan as if watching a magician. Now and then he rolled his red toy car toward Ethan, who would stop just long enough to send it gently back. Every time, Lucas giggled. Every time, Ethan's mouth twitched into the faintest ghost of a smile, as if full laughter was something dangerous that might attract the wrong kind of attention. After nearly an hour, Jack crouched beside the boy to inspect his work. "Not bad," he said. "I've seen grown men do this half as well in twice the time." Ethan didn't answer, but a tiny flicker of pride lit behind the guarded hazel. It went out quickly, like a candle being cupped against the wind. Jack let his gaze drift, deliberately casual, over Ethan's face. "How's the cheek?" he asked. "Looks like it hurts." Ethan's fingers froze on a bolt. His shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "I fell," he said. The pause before the word was half a heartbeat too long. "On the steps." Jack had heard that cadence before. In barracks, in hospitals, in courtrooms, men saying, "I'm fine, it's nothing, just bad luck." He'd learned to listen not just to words, but to the flinch underneath them. Ethan kept his eyes on the metal pieces, not on Jack. His left hand crept closer to his side, as if protecting his ribs from a blow that wasn't coming. "Uh-huh," Jack said quietly. Stares can be mean like that. For a second, he thought Ethan might look up, might see the invitation there to tell the truth. But the boy's jaw set. Whatever hunger had driven him to ask for work was not yet strong enough to crack the wall around his secrets. Jack didn't push. He knew pressure could make someone run. "Come on," he said instead, standing. "Let's close up." He paid Ethan in cash, crisp bills he could barely afford to part with, but did anyway. Ethan took the money with both hands, like something fragile. "Thank you," he said. No extra words, no questions. When the sign on the door flipped to closed and the lights dimmed, Ethan zipped his coat all the way up, pulling the collar high as if fabric could shield him from more than cold. Max followed him to the door, tail swishing slowly. "See you Wednesday?" Jack asked, leaning on the frame. Ethan nodded. "I'll be here." He stepped out into the thin, winter light. Snow hadn't started again yet, but the air held that heavy, waiting stillness. Ethan turned left, heading down the block, then farther, toward a row of aging apartment buildings at the very end of the street. His figure seemed to shrink with every step, shoulders curling in, the too big coat turning him into a moving shadow against dirty snowbanks. Jack stayed in the doorway longer than he needed to, watching. Something in the way Ethan walked, measured, careful, like he knew exactly how loud each footstep was, made Jack's gut twist. It was the walk of someone who had learned to move quietly through their own home. A child shouldn't know how to do that. "There's something wrong," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone. He could feel it in the same place that had once warned him of ambushes and bad roads. A kid shouldn't have eyes like that. As Ethan disappeared around the distant corner, swallowed by peeling paint and broken railings, the last sliver of winter light slipped below the rooftops, and the sense that this was only the beginning settled on Jack like fresh snow, quiet, cold, and impossible to ignore. Chapter 3. Shadows Behind the Window. The bruises did not stop. They changed locations, faded and reappeared in new shapes, but they did not stop. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily noticed it first because noticing was what she did. Years of nursing had trained her eyes to catalog injuries the way other people noticed fashion or haircuts. Every afternoon when Ethan slipped into the shop, shrugged off the cold, and reached for the broom, her gaze ran over him without seeming to, gathering details and storing them away. One day it was the faint yellow mark around his wrist, like fingers had been there not long ago. Another time he moved a box and his shirt lifted just enough for her to catch a glimpse of a dark blotch on his ribs, the kind of bruise that came from something unforgiving. Table edge, door frame, fist. Once he came in with a stiffness in his left leg, his walk uneven, his jaw clenched. When she asked lightly if he'd twisted his ankle at school, he just said, "I'm fine," in that flat way that meant, "Don't ask." Emily started keeping a small, spiral-bound notebook under the counter, the kind she used to jot medication times in. At first she hesitated, feeling dramatic, like she was inventing storm clouds because she'd seen them before. But every time Ethan showed up with some new mark, her heart dipped again. One slow afternoon, she opened the notebook and wrote, in small, neat handwriting, Monday, Jan 12, bruised left cheek, old, new faint marks on right wrist, quiet, polite, flinches at loud voices. She added the time, 3:34 p.m. The next entry came 2 days later. Wednesday, Jan 14. Limping slightly, favors left leg. Says, slept funny. Avoids eye contact when asked. By the third week, the pages had begun to fill. The act of writing made her stomach knot, but not writing felt worse, like walking past a car crash with your eyes shut. Jack didn't see every bruise, but he saw enough. He saw the way Ethan's shoulders tensed just a fraction whenever the bell chimed and a stranger walked in. He noticed how the boy jumped at dropped tools, then forced himself to freeze as if movement might bring trouble. It was the kind of hyper-alert stillness Jack recognized from barracks and field hospitals. One evening, snow hammered the city so hard that even the main road looked half erased. The shop was quiet, the world outside a swirling white curtain. When it was time to close, Ethan zipped his coat and reached for the door, but Jack stopped him. "Hold up," he said. "You're not walking all the way home in that mess." "I do it all the time," Ethan replied too quickly. He spoke into the zipper of his coat, eyes on the floor. "Yeah, well, tonight you don't," Jack said. "I've got the truck. I'll drive you." Ethan hesitated, shoulders drawing in. The refusal came so fast it sounded rehearsed. "It's okay, I'm fine. It's not far." "It's far enough to lose a toe," Jack said. "Come on." "I'm not asking." For a heartbeat, Ethan looked like he might argue again. Then Max jumped up from his blanket as if he'd heard his cue, trotted past them, and leaped lightly into the back seat of the old pickup waiting outside. The big dog turned around, planted himself, and stared expectantly at Ethan through the open door, tail wagging once. Something in that simple wordless invitation broke through the boy's instinct to refuse. He exhaled, a tiny surrender. "Okay," he murmured, "just this once." The truck was old but solid, the kind of vehicle that seemed held together as much by willpower as by bolts. The interior smelled faintly of coffee, leather, and a trace of engine grease that never quite left Jack's clothes. Ethan slid into the passenger seat, careful not to brush against anything, as if he might leave a mark just by existing. Max settled behind him, resting his chin on the top of the seat, warm breath fogging the cold window. As Jack drove, the wipers fought to carve visibility out of the snow. Streetlights smeared into streaks of orange and white. For a while, neither of them spoke. Jack watched Ethan from the corner of his eye, the way the boy held his small body very still, hands folded in his lap, legs close together. Not fidgety like most kids, but contained, like someone who had learned that taking up less space meant attracting less anger. "You always walk home?" Jack asked, keeping his tone casual, as if he were just making small talk. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "It's not far." "You live with your folks?" A long pause, long enough for Jack to count the beats of his own heart. "With my foster dad," Ethan said finally, voice tightening almost imperceptibly on the word dad. "Just him?" "Yeah." The answer came too quick, like he wanted to shut that line of questioning down. Jack let the conversation die. Pushing harder now would only make the kid retreat. They drove out of the more familiar business streets into an older residential area on the edge of the city. The houses changed from single-family homes with patchy lawns to tired apartment blocks with peeling paint and balconies crowded with broken chairs and rusted grills. The snow softened the ugliness, but not enough to hide it. "Which one?" Jack asked. Ethan pointed toward a three-story building near the end of the road. The brick was discolored, the windows unevenly lit, one patched with cardboard. On the second-floor balcony, a man stood hunched against the cold, a cigarette burning between his fingers. Even from the street, Jack could make out the details. The man was big, not in the strong way, but in the way of someone who'd let themselves spill out over the years. Thick around the waist, shoulders heavy with old muscle gone soft. He wore a faded flannel shirt open over a dingy white undershirt, despite the cold, and his forearms were mottled with the blotchy redness of a drinker who'd made alcohol a daily companion. His face was broad, with a jaw half hidden under a coarse, patchy beard. Broken capillaries webbed across his nose and cheeks, giving his skin a permanent, unhealthy flush. His eyes were small and pale, sunk slightly into his face, the kind that always looked vaguely irritated even when the mouth was neutral. Tonight, the mouth was not neutral. He stared down at the truck with a frown that was more suspicion than curiosity, cigarette tip glowing a mean orange in the dim. "That him?" Jack asked quietly. Ethan's voice dropped so low it almost vanished. "That's my foster dad, Frank Harris." The way he said the name, flat and resigned, made it sound less like a person and more like a sentence he'd been given. Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles paled. He had seen men like Frank before in a dozen towns, angry at life, armed with nothing but cheap beer and the power given to them over someone smaller. Men who liked to remind the world that at least they could still make someone flinch. Jack parked at the curb. "All right," he said. "We're here." Ethan nodded and reached for the door handle. Max let out a low, almost inaudible whine, then a soft growl that vibrated through the seat. As Ethan stepped out into the swirling snow, Max lunged forward, pressing his front paws against the back of the passenger seat, ears pinned back, eyes locked on the figure on the balcony above. His fur along the spine rose in a ridge, and another rumble built in his chest. "Easy," Jack murmured, laying a hand on the dog's neck. Max sat back reluctantly, but didn't look away. Ethan trudged toward the entrance, head down. As he reached the stairs, the man on the balcony flicked his cigarette into the snow and moved to the railing, leaning forward. Up close, the lines around his mouth were deeper, carved by years of scowls and shouted words. He glanced from Ethan to the truck, his stare slamming into Jack with thinly veiled hostility. Jack met his eyes, saying nothing. For a second, the wind eased, and it was just the two men measuring each other from a distance. Frank's lip curled slightly, the expression gone as quickly as it appeared. He turned, opened the apartment door behind him with a jerk, and waited, blocking the way like a bouncer at the entrance to a club no one wanted to be in. Ethan disappeared up the stairs, small against the stained concrete. At the top, he hesitated, just for a heartbeat, as if he might turn around. Then he walked past Frank into the shadowed doorway. The man looked down one last time, eyes narrowed, then shut the door with a hard, echoing slam that made Max growl again in the cab. Jack stood there a moment longer in the truck, the engine idling, the heater blowing lukewarm air that did nothing for the chill spreading through his chest. His training whispered evaluations in cold, clinical phrases: unstable posture, signs of chronic alcohol use, hostile body, language. His gut translated all of it into one clear thought: this is a bad house. Back at the shop that night, after Lucas was in bed and the closed sign had been flipped for hours, Jack sat at the tiny kitchen table with Emily. She wore an old sweater, sleeves pushed up, notebook open between them. Her handwriting marched across the pages, dates, times, injuries, small observations. He listened as she pointed out patterns, how the bruises appeared most often on Mondays and Fridays, how Ethan seemed more withdrawn on some days than others, how he flinched when someone dropped a tool but not when Max barked. Jack told her about Frank Harris on the balcony, about the cigarette, the eyes, the way Ethan's whole body seemed to shrink as he got closer to the building. He described Max's reaction, the ridge of fur, the growl that hadn't stopped until the door slammed. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line as she turned another page. "He told me once," she said quietly, "that he's been in more than one foster home." Said it like he was talking about movie plots, not his own life. Jack leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. "I've seen this before," he said. "Different country, different uniforms, same look in the eyes. People who know going home means walking into something worse than staying outside." "So, what do we do?" Emily asked. Her voice held no drama, just a steady urgency. Jack exhaled slowly. First, we keep doing what you're doing. Write it all down, dates, injuries, everything. Second, we find out who to call, Child Protective Services, social workers, whoever. Talk to someone who knows the system. He paused, jaw tightening. And if that's too slow, then we figure out what else we can do. I'm not letting that kid disappear into some police report. Max, resting at Emily's feet, lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's name, ears flicking. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, coating the city in white. Behind one of those distant windows on the edge of town, a boy with hazel eyes and a bruise on his cheek tried to make himself as small as possible. Inside the Thompson home, a quiet decision solidified into something like resolve. Chapter 4. Truth beneath the snow. Ethan showed up late that evening, 10 minutes past his usual time, and that alone was enough to put Jack on edge. The bell over the door chimed once, and then he was there, framed in the fading winter light, snow dusting his too big coat. At first he tried to move the way he always did, quiet, efficient, invisible, but the illusion broke the moment he reached for the broom with his right hand, and his left arm stayed pinned to his side like it belonged to someone else. Emily's heart lurched. From behind the counter she saw it clearly, the way he favored one shoulder, the slight sucking in of breath when the coat brushed against his upper arm. "Hey, Ethan," she said, voice deliberately light. "Can you give me a hand back here for a second?" He hesitated, then nodded. Jack busied himself with a box of parts, but his eyes tracked every step the boy took. Lucas was on the floor near Max, building a lopsided fortress out of cardboard oil filter boxes. At Emily's tiny gesture, the 6-year-old scooted closer to Max, pressing a foam ball into the dog's mouth. "Go get it, Max!" Lucas laughed as the German shepherd trotted off, tail wagging, inviting Ethan into a small island of normal childhood chaos. Emily guided Ethan around the counter, moving with the easy, practiced casualness of someone who had learned long ago that patients bolted if they felt cornered. "I've got this new first aid kit," she said, reaching for a plastic box on the shelf. "Mind helping me check what's in it? My eyes are getting old." The joke didn't land, but he nodded anyway. As he turned slightly, the sleeve of his coat shifted. That was when Emily saw the bruise. It bloomed dark and ugly along the inside of his upper left arm, spreading from bicep almost to elbow, the kind of deep, spreading purple that spoke of real force. Not a bump, not a stumble. Impact. Hard. She felt a tremor move through her hands and force them to be still. "Does it hurt when you move?" she asked quietly, her nurse's voice slipping in despite her best effort. Ethan's mouth flattened. His eyes dropped to the floor, then to Lucas rolling the ball for Max. "It's fine," he muttered, the same way someone might say, "It's just weather." I pulled something. Jack, pretending to sort wrenches nearby, caught the brief exchange. He didn't intervene, didn't push. He simply stepped closer, phone in his hand as if checking a message, and when Ethan turned to reach for the kit, Jack tapped the camera and fired off 2 quick photos, angled, close, catching the bruise without making it obvious he was looking. Ethan's jaw clenched when the movement tugged at his arm, but he didn't make a sound. Max returned and dropped the ball at his feet, looking up at him with steady amber eyes. Ethan bent awkwardly, using only his good arm, and threw it. The motion was stiff, but when Lucas whooped and chased after the dog, a small, pained half-smile flickered across Ethan's face. For the next 2 hours, Jack kept him on the lightest tasks, labeling drawers, sorting unopened boxes, anything that didn't require lifting. Ethan accepted the changes without comment, which, to Jack, was its own kind of answer. That night, after Ethan left and the shop was dark, Emily sat at the small kitchen counter with Jack's phone, zooming in on the photos until the pixels blurred. "This isn't an accident," she said, voice low and tight. "No," Jack agreed. He didn't say what else he was thinking, that the shape of the bruise looked like fingers curling, like someone had grabbed and squeezed and not let go. The next morning, Emily drove to the community library on the bus instead of taking the car. It was a squat brick building downtown, older than most of the glass and steel offices around it, with a wide staircase and a faded banner about literacy programs flapping in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of paper, printer toner, and the faint lemon of cleaning spray. She made her way to the reference desk, where a woman in her late 60s was meticulously relabeling a stack of file folders. The woman was short and a bit round, with soft shoulders and a posture that suggested she'd spent decades leaning over desks and counters. Her gray hair was cut into a sensible bob, and thin, gold-rimmed glasses perched halfway down her nose. Her skin was pale and finely lined, particularly around her mouth and eyes, the kind of wrinkles that come from frowning in concentration and then smiling in relief. A small name badge read, Sandra Klein. Sandra looked up with a patient curiosity. The kind librarian seemed to grow like a second skin. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and slightly husky, the kind that could quiet a room full of children without raising the volume. Emily explained, carefully omitting names at first, that she was looking for old local records on a woman with the last name Miller who might have disappeared years ago. As she spoke, she watched Sandra's face, trying to gauge whether the request sounded as strange aloud as it did in her own head. Sandra didn't flinch. Whatever life had handed her, a lifetime in underfunded public systems no doubt, had taught her to take odd requests in stride. "We still have access to some archived local newspapers," she said. "Let's see what we can find." They spent nearly an hour in front of an aging computer that hummed louder than it should, scrolling through digitized microfilm. Sandra typed with slow, deliberate precision, scanning headlines, adjusting date ranges. Finally, she paused. "Here," she said, tapping the screen with a blunt fingertip. The article was small, tucked between a story about a high school basketball game and a city council meeting. Local waitress missing, police not concerned. The photo was grainy but clear enough. A young woman in her early 20s with dark hair pulled into a ponytail, tired eyes, and a lopsided smile. The caption named her as Grace Miller, server at a diner on the north side, last seen leaving her shift late one night nearly a decade earlier. The article mentioned a baby boy, only a few months old. The last line was what made Emily's stomach flip. Authorities believe she may have left town voluntarily due to personal stress. No foul play is suspected at this time. That was it. No follow-up article, no resolution, just a woman who had vanished and a child left behind. "Do you remember this?" Emily asked softly. Sandra leaned back, eyes narrowing as she removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Vaguely," she admitted. "We used to get a lot of those little blurbs, single moms, people on the edge. They'd disappear, and the official answer was always, 'She probably moved on.'" There was a quiet bitterness under the words. "But if there's a child involved..." Emily took down the dates, the neighborhood, every detail she could. When she cross-checked the age of the baby with Ethan's current age in her head, everything lined up like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't wanted to admit existed. That evening, in their cramped kitchen, she laid out the printed article, her notebook, and Jack's photos of Ethan's bruises. The table looked like the beginning of a case file. "We need help," she said. "Real help. Someone who can actually do something with this." That was how Rachel Carter entered the picture. Rachel was a social worker with the county and an old friend from Emily's nursing days. When Emily called, Rachel came the next afternoon, her presence filling the shop's tiny office like a gust of determined wind. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean, with straight black hair pulled into a tight ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of her cheekbones. Her skin was a warm brown, and her eyes, dark, clear, unblinking when she focused, had the alertness of someone who had spent years reading lies and half-truths in cramped living rooms and fluorescent-lit waiting areas. A faint, almost invisible scar ran along her left jawline, a reminder of a bad night on a home visit when a desperate parent had thrown a glass. She never covered it. In her mind, it was both a warning and a promise. She knew exactly how ugly things could get, and she was still here. She wore simple clothes, black slacks, a gray sweater, a long, dark coat dusted with road to hold. An ID badge from the Department of Human Services hung on a lanyard around her neck. She listened without interrupting as Jack and Emily laid out everything. The bruises, the notebook, the photos, the drive to Frank's building, the article about Grace Miller. When they were done, Rachel sat back, jaw tight, fingers laced on top of the table. "You realize," she said slowly, "that what you're describing is not just abuse. It might be long-term neglect, maybe even fraud. If Grace is his mother and she disappeared, and Frank's been collecting money for years..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "Can you do something?" Jack asked. There was more anger in his voice than he intended. "Or is this going to be another one of those 'the system is overloaded, we'll look when we can' situations?" Rachel's eyes flashed, but not at him. "I know what you think of the system," she said. "Most days I agree, but you brought me evidence, not just a feeling." She picked up Emily's notebook, flipping through the pages of carefully documented injuries. This matters. So do those pictures." She tapped the printout of the article about Grace. "And this pisses me off." She spent the next 2 hours on the phone and her laptop, digging into records with the relentless focus of someone who had made a career out of refusing to look away. She found that Frank Harris had been listed as Ethan's foster caregiver for years, moving from address to address, always staying just ahead of scheduled home visits. Reports had been opened and closed in different counties, none with enough to trigger real action. "Classic pattern," she muttered. "He knows the system, knows how to stay just under the radar. If we don't act, Ethan becomes another lost file." Finally, she closed the laptop with a decisive snap. "I'm filing for an emergency hearing in family court," she said. "We'll bring in your notes, the photos, that old article. I'll push for a temporary removal order so he's pulled out of that apartment while we investigate." Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Jack exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "How long will it take?" he asked. "If the judge takes this seriously, a few days," Rachel said. "I can't promise anything, but I'll push, hard." She rose, gathering her things. The scar along her jaw caught the light as she turned. "You did the right thing calling me," she said. "If we don't move now, that boy is going to disappear into bureaucracy until something irreversible happens. I've seen too many names like his end in case notes instead of real lives." When she left, the shop felt both heavier and strangely lighter, like a storm front had rolled in, but at least someone was finally watching the sky. Out in the city, Ethan walked home through the snow, as he always did on his work days, one hand buried in his pocket around the small amount of cash Jack had paid him. His arms still throbbed, his ribs ached when he breathed too deep, but there was a tiny warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with his coat. He had done good work, and someone had noticed. He had no idea that, in a small auto shop in a county office, adults were quietly rearranging the future beneath his feet. Chapter 5. A Different Winter. The snow fell thicker than usual that morning, burying Denver in a muffled white hush that made even busy streets feel like they were holding their breath. Outside the tired brick building where Ethan lived, the steps had turned into slick, uneven mounds of ice and slush. Jack stood at the bottom of those steps, breath fogging in the air, shoulders squared beneath his dark winter coat. Emily was beside him, scarf wrapped tight around her neck, fingers gripping Lucas's small hand. Lucas shuffled in his green jacket and navy beanie, eyes darting between the door and Max, who stood alert at Jack's side, his black and tan fur dusted with snowflakes, ears pricked forward. Rachel Carter waited one step higher, close enough to the doorway to move first when it opened. She looked sharper than ever in a long black coat, her straight dark hair pulled back tight, Department of Human Services badge visible on a lanyard over her sweater. Her jaw was set, that faint scar along its line standing out a little more against the winter-pale light. She held a manila folder tucked under one arm and a folded document in the other hand like a shield. The door opened with a jerk. Frank Harris appeared in the frame, bulk filling the space, a stained t-shirt under a threadbare flannel despite the cold. His face was puffy and discolored from years of drinking, reddish patches blotching his cheeks and nose. Stubble covered his jaw in a patchy, uncared-for beard. His light-colored eyes were already narrowed, suspicion baked into the lines around them, as if this expression had become his resting state. "What's all this?" he demanded, voice rough and thick. Rachel didn't flinch. She unfolded the paper with slow, deliberate care and held it where he could see it. "Mr. Harris," she said, her tone crisp and official, stripped of all the warmth they'd heard at the shop. "I'm Rachel Carter, with County Child Protective Services. This is a court order from Judge Morales in family court. Today, Ethan Miller is required to come with us to a hearing. This order gives us authority to remove him from your care temporarily while the court reviews the situation." "The hell it does," Frank spat, reaching for the document, but stopping short when Max emitted a low, warning growl. The dog's body tensed, eyes locked on Frank with a predator's focus. Jack laid a hand on Max's neck, but did not pull him back. "You can read it," Rachel said, voice calm as ice. "But you can't refuse it. If you interfere, law enforcement will be involved. I suggest you don't add contempt of court to your list of problems." Frank's mouth twisted as he scanned the page, eyes moving more slowly than his temper. "You people think you know everything," he muttered. "Kid's got a roof, doesn't he? Food, clothes. Nobody cared for years, and now suddenly everyone's a hero." Emily's fingers tightened slightly around Lucas's, but she kept her voice steady. "We care now," she said simply. Frank shot her a look of pure contempt, then shouted over his shoulder, "Ethan, get out here, now!" For a moment, no one moved. Then soft footsteps sounded inside, and Ethan appeared behind him, backpack already slung over one bony shoulder. His coat was zipped to his chin, but even beneath the layers, Jack could see how thin he was. His hazel eyes flicked from Rachel to Jack to Emily, then to Lucas and Max. The dog's tail wagged once, slow and deliberate, as if to say, "I'm here." Ethan inhaled, just once, as though oxygen had suddenly become thick. "You're going with them," Frank snapped. "Tell the judge I did nothing wrong, you hear me? After everything I've done for you." The words dripped with resentment, not affection. Ethan's shoulders hunched instinctively at the tone, some old reflex, but when he stepped past Frank and out into the cold, there was something new under the fear. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, Jack opened the truck door, and Max immediately hopped into the back seat, leaving space beside him. Lucas waved, a small, tight movement, as if he was afraid any louder joy would be inappropriate. Ethan looked back once. Frank stood in the doorway, arms spread across the frame like a barricade, cigarette already in hand, eyes hard and small. Then Ethan turned away from the building that had never truly been a home and climbed into the truck. The drive to the courthouse seemed longer than it was. Downtown, snowplows had carved wet gray paths through the streets, and the courthouse steps were already shoveled, salted, and wet. The courthouse itself was a modern box of glass and pale stone, unremarkable on the outside, except for the invisible weight of decisions made inside. They waited in a small family courtroom on the third floor, the air dry and too warm. Rows of wooden benches faced a raised platform, where the judge's bench sat under the state seal. There was no jury, no grand drama, just a tired room that had seen far too many broken families and not enough justice. Judge Elena Morales entered with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time. She was in her early 60s, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled into a neat twist at the back of her head. Her skin was olive-toned, lined around the eyes and mouth in a way that suggested equal parts laughter and worry over the years. Her black robe hung straight from lean shoulders, but beneath it she moved with a contained energy, as if she refused to let the weight of other people's tragedies slow her steps. Her eyes, a deep, steady brown, were sharp but not unkind. She had presided over enough cases to know when someone was lying and when someone had simply run out of ways to tell the truth. Rachel presented the case. She spoke clearly and without theatrics, sliding exhibits across the table in plastic sleeves. Emily's notebook, pages filled, with careful dates and descriptions, printed photographs Jack had taken of Ethan's bruises, school records noting unexplained injuries and sudden quietness in class, the old news article about Grace Miller's disappearance, a summary of Frank Harris's years of moves, each one just ahead of scheduled inspections. Each piece was small on its own. Together, they formed a picture that made the silence in the courtroom feel heavier. Ethan sat at a table beside Rachel, hands folded, back straight. He kept his eyes on the worn wood in front of him most of the time, but occasionally they drifted to the second row of benches where Jack and Emily sat side by side, Lucas between them, Max lying on the floor at their feet, with his head resting on his paws. The bailiff had only allowed the dog after Rachel quietly explained he was a trained service animal for a veteran, and even then only on the condition that he stay calm. Max seemed to understand the stakes. He didn't make a sound, but his eyes never left Ethan. Frank sat at the opposite table, in a shirt that was only marginally cleaner than the one he'd worn that morning. Beside him, a public defender, Mr. Jeffries, a thin man in his 40s with thinning brown hair, a narrow face, and the perpetually exhausted look of someone juggling too many hopeless cases, flipped through a slim file with visible frustration at how little there was to work with. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, the room felt suddenly smaller. Rachel asked gentle, precise questions, and Ethan answered them quietly. He spoke of chores that felt more like punishments, of discipline that left handprints and bruises, of long nights alone while Frank drank in front of the TV, of moving from place to place without explanation. He did not cry, he did not elaborate. He just told the truth, stripped down to the bare bones, as if anything extra might make it less believable. Finally, Judge Morales leaned forward slightly. "Ethan," she said, her voice softer than it had been with the adults, "you've been very brave today. I have one more question for you, and I want you to answer it honestly. No one here can decide this for you. Do you understand?" He nodded, throat tight. "You've lived with Mr. Harris for a long time," she continued. "But for the past weeks, you've also been spending time with the Thompsons. Where do you want to live while we sort this out? Do you want to stay with Mr. Harris, or do you want to live somewhere else?" The words hung in the warm air like the moment before a storm breaks. Ethan stared at the tabletop. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. For most of his life, adults had moved him like furniture, here, there, without asking, without explaining. No one had ever framed the question this way before. "What do you want?" Slowly, he turned in his chair. In the second row, Jack's big hands were clenched together, knuckles pale, as if he were physically restraining himself from stepping forward. Emily's brown eyes shone, filled not with pity, but with fierce, steady belief. Lucas sat between them, fingers tangled in Max's fur, small shoulders tense, as if even at 6 he understood that something huge was happening. All three of them were watching him, not like a problem to be solved, but like a person whose answer mattered. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally came, was small but clear. I want to live with the Thompsons," he said. "They're the first people who ever asked me what I wanted." For a second, no one moved. Then Judge Morales let out a breath that seemed to carry years of similar moments with other children. She glanced down at the documents in front of her, then back up at Ethan. "Thank you," she said. She made a note, then addressed the room in a firmer tone. "Given the evidence presented, the documented injuries, the concerning history of placements, the unresolved disappearance of Grace Miller, and Ethan's own testimony, I am issuing the following orders. Temporary custody of Ethan Miller is removed from Frank Harris effective immediately. Temporary guardianship is granted to Jack and Emily Thompson, pending home evaluation and continued investigation. Additionally, I am referring the matter of Grace Miller's disappearance and Mr. Harris's conduct to the District Attorney's Office for review of possible criminal charges." Frank exploded, standing so fast his chair scraped back violently. "You can't just take him," he yelled. "He's mine. The bailiff, a broad man with close-cropped hair, and the practiced calm of someone who had broken up many such outbursts, stepped between Frank and the bench with one raised hand. "Sir, you need to sit down," he said. "Now." For once, Frank obeyed, more out of shock than respect. The rest of the hearing was a blur. Dates, signatures, conditions. What stayed sharp in Ethan's mind was the moment the bailiff gently guided him away from the table and toward the back, where Jack and Emily stood waiting. Lucas launched himself forward in a burst of small boy enthusiasm, stopping short at the last second, as if remembering he was in a serious place, then settling for a tight hug around Ethan's waist. Max pressed against Ethan's legs, warm and solid. Something in Ethan's chest, something that had been clenched for years, loosened just a little. That night, he did not walk back to the cold apartment at the end of the street. He rode home in the Thompson truck, backpack at his feet, Max's head resting heavily on his lap. The house they brought him to was small, a little worn around the edges, but it smelled of coffee and laundry soap and something baking in the oven. Emily showed him a room that had once been storage and now held a bed with clean sheets, a dresser, and a second-hand desk. On the wall above the desk, a corkboard waited empty. "We can put your drawings here," she said, "if you want." Within days, his pencil sketches, motorcycles, engines, streets he remembered, began to fill the board. Lucas took to calling him Big Brother without hesitation, dragging him into Lego battles and toy car races on the living room rug. Max began sleeping in the hallway outside Ethan's room every night, a silent sentry. One evening, Jack handed Ethan a metal toolbox, not new but sturdy, freshly cleaned. Etched carefully into a metal label on the lid were the letters, Ethan. Inside were simple tools, wrenches, screwdrivers, a measuring tape, each placed in its own slot. "Figured every mechanic needs his own kit," Jack said, trying for casual but failing to completely hide the emotion in his voice. Ethan ran his fingers over the letters of his name as if they might vanish. No one had ever labeled anything for him before. Later that week, they stood together on the small front porch, the sky low and white, snow drifting down in lazy spirals. The streetlight made each flake glow briefly before it landed and disappeared. Ethan leaned against the railing, bundled in a coat that actually fit. "Do you think," he asked quietly, eyes on the snow, "we'll ever find out what happened to my mom?" Jack took a breath, the cold air sharp in his lungs. He did not offer easy answers. "I don't know," he said honestly. "We're going to try. Rachel's going to dig. There might be things we don't want to hear, but I can promise you this. Whatever we find, you're not facing it alone. Not anymore." Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time, the chill in the air didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like space where something new might grow. In the winter of his 12th year, the snow did not just mean cold streets and long walks back to fear. It meant a small house where his drawings hung on the kitchen wall, a 6-year-old who grabbed his hand without asking, a German shepherd who guarded his door, and a former soldier and his wife who had chosen him not out of obligation, but out of stubborn, deliberate love. For the first time, winter did not feel like being alone. It felt like a shield. Sometimes God's miracles aren't thunder and lightning. Sometimes they look like a scared 12-year-old asking, "Can I work here?" and an ordinary family saying, "Yes, come in." In Ethan's story, God didn't split the sky. He worked through. A wounded veteran who refused to look away, a gentle woman who wrote down the truth, a little boy who said, "Big brother," like it was the most natural thing in the world, a loyal dog sleeping outside a new bedroom door. Maybe you're in your own winter right now, lonely, tired, or wondering if God still listens. Remember, not all miracles are loud. Sometimes the miracle is one small door opening, and one brave step through it. If this story touched you, comment your thoughts below. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories of quiet kindness and second chances. Before you go, a simple prayer for you. Lord, bless everyone watching this. Heal what's hidden, strengthen what's tired, and show them how to be a small miracle in someone else's life. Amen. You are not alone, and God is still working, often through people just like you.